Elvis Presley recorded hundreds of songs. Some became anthems. Some defined generations. Some followed him for the rest of his life. But there was one song he refused to record. Not because it wasn't good. Not because it didn't fit his voice. Because it was too close. Too honest. Too revealing. And the reason Elvis turned it down was something he never explained publicly. Stay with us until the end. Because this story reveals a song Elvis Presley couldn't sing. Not because he lacked the courage, but because he had too much of it. The demo arrived quietly. No fanfare. No pressure. Just another tape placed among dozens of others that passed through Elvis's hands every week. Most of them blurred together. Catchy melodies, familiar themes, promises of radio success. This one didn't. Elvis listened alone. Late in the evening, the room dim except for a lamp by the chair where he sat. The tape clicked, hissed softly, and then the music began. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was restrained. The lyrics came in gently, almost cautiously, as if they didn't want to demand attention. A man singing about feeling distant from his own life, about waking up next to success and still feeling unnamed emptiness. Elvis didn't move. By the second verse, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on nothing. The voice on the tape wasn't his, but it felt uncomfortably familiar. I gave the world what it wanted to see. Elvis reached out and lowered the volume slightly, as if afraid someone else might hear. The song didn't accuse. It didn't blame. It simply observed. That was worse, because observation left no room to argue. When the tape ended, Elvis sat there for a long moment, the silence louder than the music had been. He rewound it, listened again. This time, he caught details he hadn't the first time, the pauses between lines, the way the melody seemed to hesitate before resolving. It sounded like someone thinking out loud instead of performing. Elvis exhaled slowly. He could sing this song. That was the problem. Because if he did, it wouldn't sound like a role. It would sound like confession. Elvis didn't sleep that night. The song stayed with him, looping quietly in his head, not as melody but as meaning. It followed him into the early hours, into moments when the world usually softened enough for him to rest. This time it didn't. By morning, the tape sat on the small table beside his chair, exactly where he'd left it, untouched but impossible to ignore. Elvis dressed slowly, movements deliberate, as if giving himself time to feel differently. He didn't. At the studio later that day, the atmosphere was familiar. Instruments being tuned, voices drifting in and out of rooms, the low hum of preparation. Songs were discussed casually, almost mechanically. Elvis listened, nodded, smiled when expected. Then someone mentioned the demo. "Think you'd sound great on that one," a producer said. "Real mature. Different. Different." Elvis didn't answer right away. He stepped into booth and put on the headphones, letting another song play through first. His voice filled the room easily, effortlessly. This was a version of himself everyone trusted, controlled, confident, untouchable. When the take ended, applause filtered through the glass. "That's it," someone said. "Perfect." Elvis nodded again. But perfection wasn't the problem. When the conversation returned to the demo, Elvis felt his chest tighten slightly. He imagined standing at the microphone, singing those words with his own voice. He imagined fans listening, not hearing a story, but recognizing something private that scared him more than criticism ever could. Because once a truth is sung, it can't be taken back. He thought about how carefully his image had been built, not falsely, but selectively. The strength, the charm, the control, the joy, even the pain had limits. Shapes that fit into expectation. The song didn't. It wasn't dramatic enough to feel like performance. It was quiet, reflective, uncomfortable. "I don't know," Elvis finally said. The room paused. "What don't you know?" someone asked. Elvis removed the headphones and set them down gently. "If that one's for me." No one argued. They could sense it. Some songs aren't rejected. They're respected at a distance. Elvis stepped outside for air, the door closing softly behind him. He stood alone for a moment, eyes closed, listening to the city's sounds bleed through the walls. He understood then why the song felt dangerous. If he sang it, people wouldn't just hear it. They'd believe it. Elvis walked farther than he meant to, out past the studio doors, past the place where assistants usually waited, until the noise of production faded into something distant and unimportant. He needed space, not from people, but from a version of himself that had learned how to stay composed no matter what he felt. The song hadn't upset him because it was sad. Sadness was familiar, manageable. It unsettled him because it was honest in a way that didn't ask permission. He leaned against the side of the building, lighting a cigarette he didn't really want, watching the smoke drift upward and disappear. The lyrics replayed again, not as words now, but as a feeling, the sense of living inside expectations that no longer belonged to you. Elvis had spent years learning how to give people what they needed to see. Strength when they wanted reassurance. Confidence when they wanted certainty. Joy when they wanted escape. And somewhere along the way, that skill had become a reflex. The song didn't allow for reflex. It asked for stillness, for presence, for a kind of vulnerability that didn't resolve neatly at the end of 3 minutes. He thought about his younger self, the boy who sang because he felt things too deeply to keep them contained. Back then, music had been release. Now it was responsibility. That difference mattered. Elvis realized the song was asking him to return to a place he no longer visited easily, a place where singing wasn't about delivering something polished, but about letting something real escape. He flicked the cigarette away and went back inside. The tape was still there, waiting. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, reading the songwriter's name again. Someone he respected. Someone who hadn't written this to expose him, but to express something they couldn't say any other way. That made the choice harder. Elvis understood then that refusing the song was an act of fear. It was an act of control. He wasn't ready to let the world hear that part of him. Not yet, and maybe not ever. He placed the tape back where he'd found it. Not discarded. Just set aside. Some truths he knew didn't need to be shared to be acknowledged. They just needed to be felt privately, honestly, without becoming spectacle. Elvis didn't announce his decision. He didn't need to. The studio moved on the way it always did. One song replacing another, one plan adjusting quietly without ceremony. The demo stopped being mentioned, not because it was forgotten, but because everyone understood it had crossed a line no one was meant to step over. Elvis watched that happen with a strange mix of relief and loss. There was safety in the silence, but silence came with a price. Later that evening, after the last session ended, Elvis stayed behind. The studio emptied gradually, voices fading, lights dimming until only one room remained softly illuminated. He sat alone at the piano, not to play, just to be there. He thought about how many parts of his life were already public property. His voice, his image, his mistakes, his successes, even his pain, when shaped the right way, belonged to others. The song had asked for something different. It had asked him to give without shaping, to stand exposed without resolution. And Elvis wasn't sure the world would know how to receive that, or respect it once it had. He ran his fingers lightly over the piano keys, pressing one note, then another. No melody, no rhythm, just sound that, he realized, was what the song represented, not performance. Truth without applause. As he sat there, Elvis understood something that had taken him years to admit. Protecting his inner life wasn't weakness. It was survival. If he let everything out, there would be nothing left that belonged only to him. He stood, turned off the light, and left the room quietly. The song stayed behind. Not rejected, just unanswered. Elvis didn't feel the weight of the decision right away. At first, life moved forward exactly as it always had. New songs replaced old ones. New sessions filled the calendar. Applause arrived on cue. The machine kept working, smooth and relentless. But silence as a delayed echo. It surfaced in moments Elvis didn't expect. In the pause before a note, in the space between lines where he usually relied on instinct. He began to notice something missing. Not in the music itself, but in how it left him feeling afterward. Songs ended, crowds roared, and Elvis felt finished, not satisfied, not relieved, empty in a quiet, confusing way. He would leave the studio or the stage and feel like something had stayed behind. Not a mistake, not a failure, but a part of himself that hadn't been invited to come along. The song returned to him then, not as sound, but as memory, not the lyrics, the feeling. That restrained honesty, that refusal to perform its own pain. Elvis started hearing it in other people's music. Songs that weren't perfect, that weren't polished, but carried a kind of truth that lingered longer than melody. He respected them. He envied them. Once, late at night, he pulled the demo out again. He didn't play it. He just held it. He realized then that the cost of not recording the song wasn't public. No one knew. No headlines followed him. No one asked questions. The cost was private. It was a knowledge that he had drawn a boundary, and that boundaries, once drawn, shape everything that follows. He began to understand why artists sometimes talk about losing their voice without losing their ability to sing. The song hadn't taken his voice. It had reminded him that some truths once recognized don't disappear just because you choose not to share them, and that choosing silence doesn't mean silence chooses you back. Elvis never told anyone about the song. Not years later. Not in interviews. Not in moments of honesty softened by time. It remained unnamed, unrecorded, untouched by the world. And yet, it stayed with him in ways that shaped more than any hit ever could. As the years passed, Elvis became more aware of the balance he was constantly negotiating. Every performance gave something. Every recording took something else. He learned where to open himself and where to close the door, not out of fear, but out of necessity. The song had taught him that. By refusing it, Elvis protected a part of himself that still belonged only to him. A quiet interior place where he didn't need to explain, justify, or resolve what he felt. That place became a refuge, fragile, but real. But protection has a cost. Sometimes, in moments when the room was quiet and the world wasn't asking for anything, Elvis felt the absence of that song like a shadow just outside his reach. Not regret, something more complicated. A curiosity. What would it have felt like to let that truth live outside of him? To trust the world with something unfinished? He never answered those questions. Instead, he carried them. The song became a private marker, a reminder that not everything meaningful needs an audience, but also that withholding truth changes the shape of what remains. Elvis continued to sing, continued to give, continued to be heard. But somewhere beneath the applause, there was always the awareness of a song that had known him too well to be shared. And in that awareness, Elvis understood something quietly profound. Some songs are not meant to be recorded. They are meant to be lived with, not as confession, not as spectacle, but as a line you draw between what you offer the world and what you keep in order to survive it.